Watch this.
A new school choice law in Idaho is already in the hot seat. Several groups are now suing, saying it weakens public schools and violates the state constitution. Idaho's budget numbers pulled a U-turn. Last month, we were in the hole by about $80 million, but now, state is back in the black. We'll explain how it happened and if it's good enough for both sides of the aisle. This time 4 years ago, Idaho was deep in the COVID-19 pandemic. Tonight, we're looking back on the dire situation healthcare workers were facing and the changes that have happened since. A coalition of pro-public education groups filed a lawsuit today challenging Idaho's new school choice law, which allows public dollars to essentially be used on private education. And our Aspen Shumpert joins us in studio this evening. I know you were at a major event that group held today. What were their talking points? What's their big push?
Right, Joe. They're arguing that that law, House Bill 93, violates the Idaho Constitution. House Bill 93 came out of the 2025 legislative session, allocating $50 million of public tax dollars to fund private school tuition. Sponsors and supporters of that bill during the session wanted to pass something like this to create better opportunities for Idaho families with students that are better served outside of public education. But in a lawsuit filed today, several Idaho groups, including the Committee to Protect and Preserve the Idaho Constitution, the Mormon Women for Ethical Government, and the Idaho Education Association, argue the Idaho Constitution, quote, requires the legislature to establish and maintain a general, uniform, and thorough system of public free common schools.
It weakens our public schools. It strips resources from the majority of Idaho children. It benefits only a few, but at the expense of all. Idaho's children deserve better.
The coalition also raises concerns about discrimination, pointing out that private schools can reject students based on religion, disability, or academic performance while still receiving public funding. An Idaho lawmaker who shares that same thought is Senator Janie Ward Engelking. She was in the crowd today as the groups announced their announcement for their lawsuit, and she's one of the Idaho lawmakers who voted against House Bill 93 while it made its way through the legislature. As a retired teacher, Ward Engelking says properly funding public education is critical.
It's unfair for families, it's unfair to children, and it's unfair to public schools to say, we'll skim off these kids, you take the harder students, the ones that need more resources, and we'll give you less money.
The lawsuit was filed with the Idaho Supreme Court this afternoon on what also happens to be National Constitution Day, Joe. The groups are asking the Idaho Supreme Court to declare House Bill 93 unconstitutional.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, we know that Republicans who supported it and passed it, they say that this to them is not public dollars going to private education because this is a tax credit. They argue that there are tax credits for all kinds of things. It'll be interesting, though, now that this has landed in court to see where this goes.
Yeah, definitely two sides of the aisle when it comes to this conversation.
Very far apart. All right, Aspen, we'll keep an eye on that one. Thanks for the update. Last month, we saw major money moves from the state of Idaho. A report from the nonpartisan Legislative Service Office showed Idaho's budget for the fiscal year was projected to be running short about $80 million. The report last month signaled that Idaho missed the mark on projected revenue, aka tax collections. In response, Governor Little published an executive order telling agencies, minus K-12 public schools, to cut 3% of their budget. So, was that cut enough? Did it make a difference? Is Idaho now positioned differently in terms of financial fashion? A new report is now out with answers, and we have reaction from the legislative players. Extra, extra, read all about it. Idaho's updated general fund numbers, hot off the press. In last month's edition, Idaho was in the red by about $80 million, but action from the governor to cut budgets on the fly looked to make a change.
Governor Little's decision to do a temporary 3% holdback for now proved to be very wise, very precautionary, and it's put us back in the black.
Representative Wendy Horman is a co-chair of Idaho's Budgeting Committee.
We tried to say this last month when we were a little bit under. It was not time to panic. Now we're a little bit over. It's still not time to panic. It's still time to just look at what the actuals are in January when we get back and make decisions.
The updated numbers in the nonpartisan September budget monitor have Idaho as a plus $22 million ending balance, a swing of about $100 million since last month.
You're looking at numbers that are 1 million up or 20 million down or 8 million up. Those are essentially rounding errors in that size of a budget. So I think a key metric to look at is the size of the variance. It's very small, whether it was last month a little bit under, this month a little bit over.
The revised projection now puts Idaho back in the black at $21.8 million. What was your reaction to this news coming out?
Well, we're still lagging behind in revenues again, like $22 million. And had we not, seen the governor actually do those 3% holdbacks already, we'd still be in the quote unquote hole.
Democratic leader Senator Melissa Wintrow has been consistent for months in her belief that budget numbers for Idaho look concerning.
I've heard people say, oh, it's wait and see. We'll see how the revenues go. But I just am at a loss as to how we do budgeting based on let's wait and see, and it's going to be okay. I mean, budgeting is about common sense and math, and we just haven't followed that.
The budget report explains that collections for Idaho are still $22.6 million, or 2.8% less than predicted. Why do you think that is?
Well, it was irresponsible budgeting. It was just being reckless. It was, folks, my colleagues across the aisle saying we want to do tax cuts. Unfortunately, they help wealthy families. And, it's easy to politically say, hey, let's do some tax cuts, vote for me. But that's just that's not responsible governance.
You're going to have members from the Democrat Party saying, oh, the tax cuts were too deep. Well, I prioritize families being able to keep their own money. They prioritize letting the government spend the money.
We're just in a disastrous place that we could have prevented all along by actually using conservative budgeting principles and not being so reckless and really looking at tax cuts to get elected instead of responsible governance that really helps citizens instead of hindering their very prosperity.
People want to point fingers and blame at certain laws that were passed, and that's fine. They can do that. But over in JFAC, we're going to just go with sound fiscal policy, not political ideologies. We're going to make the decisions that are best for the taxpayers of Idaho. And right now, we're showing that we've been responsible with the funding they gave us. We're returning as much of it as we can to them and to families who desperately need it for their own living expenses. Again, the sky is not falling. This is not a time for panic, in my opinion. That is a change, but the key number there is in the black, and that's what matters going forward.
There are still questions, too, about how the federal funding situation will impact Idaho. There's a new $1.3 million plan to expand Boise's Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office. It's a part of current President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill that poured $75 billion into ICE nationwide. Right now, the agency uses almost $30 billion of that across offices and states all over the country. Plans filed by local architecture firm Erstad show that ICE wants to knock down and rebuild some walls inside its offices in Boise. And they also are calling for a reconfigured office space with some new storage rooms, basically making the building more useful for the agency's day-to-day operations. As we reported earlier this summer, Boise is not a sanctuary city, which means local law enforcement can and does cooperate with federal immigration investigators. So this expansion is just the latest sign that ICE is settling in for a long haul here in the capital city. A new ruling from a federal appeals court just gave the green light to a controversial piece of President Trump's spending and tax plan. It's a big one because it impacts Planned Parenthood and millions of patients who rely on Medicaid. Last week, a federal appeals court cleared the way for part of the president's tax and spending plan to move forward. The law is tucked into what was called the One Big Beautiful Bill, and it blocks Planned Parenthood and its affiliates from receiving Medicaid dollars if they continue providing abortions. This is a big reversal because just a few months ago, a federal judge had stopped the law, saying it likely violated the Constitution because it singled out Planned Parenthood as punishment. But now the appeals court has put the decision on hold, letting the law take effect. Planned Parenthood says the consequences could be devastating. Nearly 200 clinics in 24 states could close, and more than 1 million patients who rely on Medicaid for care may no longer be able to use their insurance at those healthcare centers.
Planned Parenthood is being targeted by the Trump-Vance administration and obviously an anti-abortion Congress because Planned Parenthood provides abortion where it is legal. In Idaho, we already have a near total ban, but that's not stopping politicians from trying to eliminate us from Medicaid. And we know what happens when Planned Parenthood health centers are defunded. Planned Parenthood health centers save lives. Cancers go undetected when we're defunded. STIs go untreated. Birth control is harder to get, and the public health infrastructure begins to break down. And in Idaho, that's even more critical because we already are facing a shortage of providers. So Planned Parenthood is a really critical provider in a rapidly declining healthcare safety net in Idaho.
The Justice Department argues that Congress has the authority to decide where taxpayer money goes and that pulling Medicaid funding isn't the same as punishing a group under the Constitution. Planned Parenthood leaders say that they're not giving up the fight. Legal experts expect more challenges ahead, and the case could eventually end up at the U.S. Supreme Court. So, to lessen the impact on patients in the short term, Medicaid patients with appointments in September will continue to receive their care at no cost. Then beginning October 1st, Planned Parenthood will move to a fee-based scale for Medicaid patients. The legality of Idaho's voter identification laws were debated in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals today. House Bill 124 went into effect last year. It removed student IDs as an acceptable form of voter ID at the polls. In March of 2023, a youth voting advocacy group called Babe Vote, as well as the League of Women Voters, sued the state of Idaho. They argue that the laws violate young Idahoans' right to equal protection and the right of suffrage under the Idaho Constitution. Then, the following October, a district judge sided with the state and ruled the laws are constitutional. The organizations, they appealed that decision to the Idaho Supreme Court, which upheld the district judge's decision. But today's hearing, judges with the appeals court asked the state attorney about why any evidence cited when they had these laws created.
What evidence of fraud was there with respect to student IDs?
We haven't been able to detect, we haven't detected yet any evidence of it actually happening. But
So fraud was imagined as a possibility, but there was no evidence of fraud using student ID?
Imagine makes it sound a little more speculative than it really is. If we've shown what the IDs look like, the student IDs versus government IDs. And
Well, take away the word imagined. There was no evidence of using false IDs for that purpose.
It has not happened yet, and it won't be able to happen in the future thanks to this law. But in Crawford, it does talk about two separate interests, both in preventing fraud and also promoting public confidence in the integrity of the election.
In enacting this legislation, was there anything in front of the legislature in terms of student IDs in other states? I mean, how broadly did they sweep in trying to figure out whether this was a potential problem?
There's no evidence in the record about what the legislature considered, but I can tell you that multiple other states have also prohibited students' IDs from being used in elections.
Attorneys for Babe Vote doubled down on their argument that the law discriminates against young people. The court judge says that they will take both arguments under their panel's consideration. About this time 4 years ago, we were deep in the COVID-19 pandemic. The state of Idaho had just declared that all of its hospitals were operating under crisis standards of care. At the time, there were more than 720 COVID patients in our hospitals, nearly 190 in our ICUs, and the state had reported 40 deaths so far. Healthcare officials we talked to at the time said it was one of the worst points since the pandemic began in March of 2020. And one of the main issues hospitals were dealing with was misinformation and vaccine hesitancy. Let's take a look back. Frontline healthcare workers at St. Luke's continue to work around the clock caring for very sick patients battling COVID in the ICU. This is video recently shot by St. Luke's inside their intensive care units at two different locations.
There's a 39-year-old intubated, unvaccinated, paralyzed, sedated with COVID-19.
Dr. Jim Souza is the chief physician executive for St. Luke's Health System. He says even if the unvaccinated 39-year-old does survive, he will go back to a much different life.
If this 39-year-old man can survive, that's not going to be waking up, standing up from this bed and walking out. He is going to be terribly disabled by this.
Idaho hospitals have faced significant challenges during the pandemic, most notably in late 2020 when there were serious concerns about the state of the medical system as more and more people needed COVID treatment and ICU beds began to fill up. Frontline healthcare workers say right now it feels worse than the previous pandemic peak.
I actually think now is busier than it was at last year in November, December time. Seen a lot sicker patients as well too.
Ross Armstrong is a respiratory therapist in the critical care unit. He's worked 15 years at St. Luke's. And like other frontline healthcare workers, Armstrong is frustrated with the current situation as they treat COVID patients with a common denominator.
All the patients we have in COVID here are unvaccinated patients. It's getting to be more frustrating because there's a way to take care of it with getting vaccinated. But there's so much controversy around that for no reason at all. That's what's frustrating about it, is this doesn't need to be happening.
But it is happening, and it is resulting in tragic outcomes every single day.
Unfortunately, too many instances of standing next to families here in the hallway outside the door as they look in through the glass tearfully while their loved one dies. That happened right behind me just last week. The 48-year-old patient while her 4 children stood outside the door and said goodbye.
Dr. William Dittrich is a pulmonary care physician. On top of everything he's dealing with right now, he has concerns about what's coming.
What we're seeing now in our ICUs and our hospitals is people who got infected 2 weeks ago at the fair or at a party or a get-together. There's even more of them out there now than there are here now. And so I'm really worried about what's coming in a week and in 2 weeks. And I'm really worried about what that's going to do to our staff, my friends here, our colleagues, because I already see what it's doing to them now.
Frontline healthcare workers continue to advocate for the safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines as they continue to treat a vast majority of very sick people that are not vaccinated and in grave health.
Really, truly only happening to unvaccinated people. In all the time that I've been taking care of patients here in the last year and a half, I've had one patient that I've taken care of that was vaccinated, and it was someone who had had an organ transplant and was immunosuppressed.
The call from the Idaho medical community to the rest of the state is clear. They ask everyone to do what they can to help the situation, a situation getting worse and worse by the week.
Masking, washing our hands, trying to distance somewhat. I know those things are hard, and I know people just want to go back to normal life and being together and enjoying each other, and I do too. But I want to be able to do that with all the people and not lose any more.
So a lot has happened since that story aired, and the state of Idaho has made several big changes since the pandemic ended. The state passed a law banning government and school mask mandates to combat infectious diseases. That means local school boards, city governments, and even public health districts can no longer require masks during outbreaks or future disease threats. The state of Idaho also strengthened its protections around medical choices. A new medical freedom law now prohibits employers, schools, or other entities from forcing someone to get vaccinated or medically treated as a condition to work.
Summer is coming to a close and fall is just on the other side of the weekend ahead of us, but we are already seeing sprinkles of fall all around the Treasure Valley. Look at this. All these trees here still mostly green as is typical for summer, but the tops of them you can see those colors are starting to change. Leaves are turning reds and oranges and browns. It is still very warm outside. We are getting to the warmest day of the week, which will be tomorrow, but still above average today. We are at 84 right now in Boise. Mid 80s for most of the Treasure Valley. Treasure Valley, the warmest around southwest Idaho, because Magic Valley still in the 70s, so much more pleasant there, as well as in the mountains, which are all in the low 70s for the most part. Rest of the evening should be pretty pleasant though for Boise. Sun will go down at 7:51. We should be in the 70s at that point, so that little bit of daylight after sunset should be pretty pleasant this afternoon. Probably a good time to spend some time on your patio this evening. Tomorrow, though, will be hotter. We're going to be close to 10 degrees above average around the region. Boise expecting 88 degrees, but several spots in the Treasure Valley pushing the upper 90s tomorrow. Caldwell and Mountain Home looking at 89 degrees tomorrow. Magic Valley then looking at the mid 80s. Hopefully the mountains still getting some more relief from the heat, sticking in the 70s for the most part. This ridge of high pressure will continue to build over the next several days. We're watching this low pressure system along with another one which will approach us as we get closer to the weekend. Now for the short-term period, it looks like tomorrow night into Friday morning, it could bring us some cloud cover. Not looking at any major impacts just yet, but by the time we get to Saturday, Sunday for the weekend, we could see some isolated showers and thunderstorms in higher elevations, so mountains specifically, because Boise still looking fairly dry and warm for the next week ahead of us. The most moisture we're looking at in Boise is going to be some cloud cover. Don't forget, fall starts on Monday.
All right, let's get to the comment. Tron 7000 to see your thoughts. This person writes, maybe if we didn't fund private schools, we would have more in the budget. That's Brian in Boise. Yeah, you know, I spoke with Co-Chair Wendy Horman about this. It's kind of just a matter of what your legislative priorities are. $50 million to this, in some view, is a good choice. Others would like to see $50 million going other places. We will follow the lawsuit, though, into this whole thing. See you tomorrow.
Continue with us and watch free now on the KTVB Plus app everywhere you stream.